everyone. We are in the special business meeting of the District of Squamish for Tuesday, March 14th. And we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have already approved the agenda. There are a series of 4 public hearings in front of us. We'll deal with the public hearings in one mass, as one public hearing for all 4 bylaws. One councillor has a conflict on one of them, so we'll put that one to the very end, and that is bylaw 2511. We will rearrange the order of this a little bit. But prior to that, as part of all public hearings, I must read this statement. This public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to Council respecting matters contained in the proposed District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw 2011 Amendment Bylaw Mini Storage and Drive-Thru Restaurants number 2511, 2016. District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw number 2011 Amendment Bylaw Miscellaneous Amendments number 2512, 2016. District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw number 2011 Amendment Bylaw Downtown Commercial number 2513, 2016. And District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw 2011 Amendment Bylaw Paco Road number 2517, 2017. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, councillors receive documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the Planning Department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or action of members of council or any other person addressing council. And I'll call on the Planning Department to introduce the bylaws.
Thanks, Mayor Heisman. The first bylaw on the docket is for Paco Road. It's proposed bylaw number 2517, 2017. So the Paco Road area is proposed to be rezoned from multiple unit 2, RM2, to new light industrial zone. This area was rezoned in 1990 to allow multifamily residential development, and this restricted the existing businesses out there from doing any expansions, renovations, or upgrades. The proposed rezoning will resolve this long-standing non-conforming issues that have been faced by the owners and tenants out there and legitimize the current uses to support this important industrial hub. It will protect the estimated 90 jobs in the area while supporting existing property owners' interests in developing mixed-use, live-work, light industrial uses. The creation of the new light industrial small lot zone is proposed to permit mainly light industrial land uses within the Paco Road area. The new zone is based on the results of a meeting with the owners and the tenants that was held this past summer, 2016, the results of a survey that was distributed to the owners and tenants, as well as on the existing light industrial zones. And it's also taking into consideration the specific site constraints of the small lots that are in that area. And this is the map that highlights the specific properties in the Paco Road area that are to be rezoned. In terms of public comments, there's been no comments received to date other than the engagement that's occurred in the past with the owners. No new comments received to date.
So we are going to break the comment period down into separate aspects, just so we make sure we're not making it confusing for people. So I have one person on my list for the Paco Road public hearing, bylaw 2517, and that is Walter Huber. And please, if you're not on the list but you would like to speak to a bylaw, just put your hand up and I'll acknowledge you, and you come over to the podium and just state your name. And we're not requiring that you actually state your street address, but we would like it if you said which neighborhood or which area, if you're not from Squamish, where your home address is. But you don't have to actually say your home address. So first up we have, well, actually I'll quickly go to council. Are there any questions for clarification? on Packer Road, Councillor Chappelle?
The small lot designation, what happens if property owners decide that they want to amalgamate 2 lots? Does that come as a rezoning, or is that it's totally fine if the industrial users want to make a larger building in the same use?
Well, Terrell's our subdivision coordinator, so she can probably speak to the
Yes, through you, Mayor
consolidation.
Heisman, totally fine.
Thank you.
See any other hands from council? Walter Huber. Welcome, and just please state your name and the neighborhood in which you live. And just one more thing, if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Okay, my name is Walter Huber. I live on 2557 Malcolm Road, just across the Mashpee Creek Bridge. What was the other thing?
If you represent yourself, a business or
I
an
represent
organization.
myself, yeah. I'm the owner of 2 lots across the Mashpee Creek Bridge. One is Strada and the other one is a shop. It's PP21. I had a question and a comment. I just noticed it last week that the zoning change is taking place. It's about 4 years ago that I noticed that on Packer Road, building activities started to take place. And especially Black Mount Logging Company has started probably $500,000 shop renovation, or even probably more, cleaning up the old junkyard that was there before. So, and I live at probably 500, maybe 800 meters away from Lot 10, the end of Packer Road. And it's amazing how it's actually more like heavy industrial activity that's taking place. So my comment is, why was not the rezoning taking place like 5 years ago, before all the changes and the activities, the buildings that have taken place, which are industrial, were permitted under the old zoning?
Sorry, can you just say that question again?
Why
didn't this
were all
rezoning-
the rebuilding and renovations permitted, especially Black Mount Logging, under the old zoning without a public hearing?
Okay. Yes, Miss. Go ahead.
So
No.
any renovations to existing buildings would have been permitted under the legally non-conforming provision. The zoning came into effect in the 90s
Yeah.
for multifamily housing, which never happened on that site. But any uses that were there previous to that and any associated buildings would be permitted to renovate.
As my understanding was, there was a restriction and nothing was supposed to be done on the buildings under that zoning. That's when, because I was involved at the time, as I was, the same was commercial 5 zoning, the whole area. Packer Road and the area where I live was former co-op, and now is Fred Hinchcliffe junkyard is on just my neighbor on the side. So I have that. It took a couple of years, probably 2 years, to get permission to build where on the one lot that I owned that. And that's why I had all this background information, that nobody was supposed to do any renovation or just bare maintenance under the zoning that it was. So a lot of things happened, and I don't have any objection except that heavy industrial use out of the land and across the map. It's right beside the river. And there's been a whole bunch of activities. I've been down to the municipal hall a couple of times in the office to find out first if there was a building permit. There wasn't one, and apparently one was issued. The cleanup of the junkyard that was there for probably about 40 years, all the industrial waste, and everything seems to be fine. And it's the first time that I publicly voiced my opinion. So That's about it. I just wanted to be everybody aware of the situation, and I'm not happy that the changes have taken place before the zoning has taken place, because this is the opportunity for somebody like me to speak up.
Can I ask a question? So in terms of the new zone, you're not in support of the new zone?
There is basically no change, but the conflict I have, the heavy logging industry, when machines start 3 o'clock in the morning in the summertime and there's fire season, and the noise, and also when they clean their equipment, steam clean their equipment, they replaced sump pole kind of setup. There was an old tank that collected some of the runoff from the junkyard that was replaced, and another pit was dug there, huge pit actually, and to collect the runoff from the logging equipment. So that's of course, this all happened over the last 4 years. So, well, I think I'm worried about the site that I am on. It was for sale as industrial land. It was marketed. I went into the planning department on Friday or Thursday last week, and I discovered it actually is a different zoning now. I can't remember exactly what it is. But it doesn't comply with the operations that are going on there presently in my neighborhood at all. So it's nice to have bylaws and zonings, but they should also properly be looked at.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the Paco Road rezoning proposal? Councillor Elliott?
To the best of our knowledge, are there any non-conforming uses once we change the?
No, the intention is to resolve all the non-conforming issues. So we tried to look at what businesses are in existence there and design the bylaw to permit those businesses.
There's a few residences fronting onto the main road. Are they affected by this?
The bylaw permits accessory residential, so those houses may still be, if they're just a residence and that's the sole use, they may still be legally non-conforming because they've been there for forever.
Okay, I don't see anyone else at this point, so if we could move on to the next bylaw. And on this point, all the bylaws, the public hearing is open, so if someone does want to comment on a bylaw that's already been spoken to, they're absolutely more than able to, but we're just trying to make sure we're compartmentalizing it a bit so we're not all over the place in terms of who's speaking to what bylaws and confusing everyone. We're doing this one last.
This one last?
One last.
Okay. Which one next?
Whichever, doesn't matter to me, that one's last.
Okay.
Councillor Pryor has a conflict on that one, so we need to make sure
Yeah.
he is able to leave the room when we discuss that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Did it? We got there. Okay, next up we have a series of miscellaneous amendments. This is proposed bylaw number 2512, 2016. This is quite a lengthy list, so at Mayor's discretion, of course, I'm happy to take questions, but I'll go otherwise. Okay, I'll start with some amendments we're considering to be housekeeping amendments. These include replacing the word duplex with the words dwelling 2 unit throughout the bylaw, and that's to provide consistency because duplex is not a defined term in the bylaw, but dwelling 2 unit is. We propose updating language in part of the general regulations section to clarify that general regulations in fact apply to all zones in Squamish. Next is to add setback requirements for accessory structures, which is currently missing from the general regulations section. It only refers to accessory buildings. Also to clarify the intent of part of the general regulations section by reorganizing some bullet points. The intent of this section is to require commercial, industrial, and institutional uses to provide visual screening from residential zones or development. And this is a case in the bylaw where there's an and where there should be an or. So we just like to fix that so it's clear for everyone. Clarifying in another section of the general regulations section that the gross floor area of garages can only be accepted once per dwelling unit, with the exception of a secondary suite that is located within a single unit dwelling. So it's currently unclear whether this exemption applies to both a principal residence with an attached garage and a detached garage located on the same property, and whether it can be used more than once for duplexes or townhouses or a single unit dwelling with a carriage house.
Can I just pause you there for one moment? I believe
Yeah.
Councillor Pryor has to make a statement.
Well, on the C10, which I see up there, I called myself in conflict on that last time, but as it turns out, the C10 property I have is already zoned with all this in place, so it doesn't affect that, so I'm not in conflict on C10.
So you're not in
So-
conflict on this bylaw
And so I'm
anymore.
staying in on this, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Next housekeeping amendment is to add regulations for accessory buildings to the residential mobile home park, RMH1 zone, and that's to bring that zone into alignment with other residential zones. Next, to change the words, the permitted use that's worded home occupation multiple unit to home occupation residential in the RMH1 zone and home occupation office in the Artisan Village or C10 zone. And that's because home occupation multiple unit is not a defined term in the bylaw, so we'd like to stick with the defined terms. Okay, a series of other amendments. Next up, this amendment proposes updating the list of uses that are permitted throughout all zones to include electric vehicle charging station, and that would be everywhere except residential zones, and district thermal energy system, and public art. The definition of height is proposed to be updated to increase clarity for designers and staff. No changes are proposed to the permitted height of structures in any zones. The amendment simply clarifies where height is to be measured to for different roof types. A diagram on the screen above is proposed to be included in the bylaw as well for additional clarity. Because setbacks for accessory buildings have changed over the years in some zones, it is possible right now to have an accessory building that was built with proper permits to the required setbacks of the day, but that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements. And under the current bylaw, a vertical carriage house addition to such an existing building would have to meet the current setbacks. So this amendment proposes allowing a carriage house to be built above an existing non-conforming accessory building, as long as the accessory building was built before March 2016 and its siting is what's known as legally non-conforming, and that it complied with the required setbacks at the time it was built. The objective of this amendment is to make it easier for people who might be in the situation to add a detached secondary dwelling to their property. Should this amendment proceed, the onus would be on the proponents of the new accessory dwelling to prove that the existing accessory building meets these conditions. Heating, air conditioning, and ventilation, or HVAC systems for multi-unit residential, commercial, and industrial buildings can be a noise nuisance to adjacent residential properties. To help dampen the sound generated by this equipment, solid screening around the equipment is proposed to be required for all new HVAC systems. as a retaining wall change here. The height of combined retaining walls and fences is currently limited to 2.44 meters when located within 1.22 meters of a front or exterior side lot line. And this amendment proposes limiting the height to the same when located within 1.22 meters of any lot line. So also on the rear and interior side lot lines. And the intention of this proposed change is to reduce the impact of combined retaining walls and fences on neighbors. Access requirements. There are currently a few driveway regulations in the zoning bylaw. The subdivision and development control bylaw should, however, be the authority on access. So this amendment proposes removing a few overlapping regulations from the zoning bylaw, which will eliminate the conflicts that currently exist between these two bylaws. As Squamish grows, we're seeing increased demand for office space. The objective of proposed changes in the business park is to permit the use of underutilized existing upper story office space in the business park. And 2 buildings have been identified as having upper story space that meets the requirements of the building code for separate office use. This amendment proposes permitting office use only in these 2 buildings, which is thought to be a quick win for adding office space without reducing the space available for industrial uses, and wouldn't permit further development of these type of buildings. Regarding usable open space, the zoning bylaw currently requires that new multi-unit residential projects provide usable open space, which is typically a green space that is accessible to all residents, and they also have to provide private open space in the form of a patio, deck, or private yard. The problem we have now is that these 2 types of usable open space, common and private, are lumped together in one definition, and it's difficult to distinguish which is actually required. So this amendment doesn't propose any change to the amount of usable open space required in any zone. It's just meant to clarify whether it's common open space or private open space or both that's required. To achieve this, 2 new definitions are proposed, and within each zone that currently requires usable open space, it would be clarified what we're talking about, whether we're talking about common open space and when we mean private open space. Industrially zoned properties are currently permitted to have an accessory dwelling. You can think of it as a caretaker suite. What's not currently clear in the bylaw is whether it's 1 caretaker suite that's permitted per property or 1 per building, or what it means when a building is stratified. This amendment is proposed to clarify that only 1 caretaker suite is permitted on each industrial lot, regardless of how many buildings are on the lot or whether they are strata titled. We have received a few public comments regarding the miscellaneous amendments bylaw. The first is support for detached accessory residential above existing accessory buildings regardless of the setbacks. It's thought that this would create more infill rental housing and avoid Board of Variance applications. And there is also a letter of support received for adding the upper story office use in the business park to these 2 buildings that staff believe are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions for clarification purposes from staff? I don't see any. I have 2 names, or 3 names, sort of 2.5 names on the list. First up is Sandra Brule and Dave Heisler. Did you want to speak to this? You're on the other list too, so.
Yeah.
Not this one? Okay. Next up, Phil DeBrule. Please just state your name and the neighborhood that you live in, and if you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
My name is Philip DeBrule. I live at 1204 Main Street, and I represent myself as well as some other residents in the area. I'd like to speak specifically to section, the HVAC section, so just bear with me, 4.7, the screening, section G.
Okay.
My interpretation of this particular bylaw is that it is rather loose, and I fear that there might be an opportunity lost in terms of there being some dampening of the sound. I read it as being towards consideration to an external HVAC system that might be on a roof, for example, or is not enclosed inside a building. Noise can still be transmitted through a temporary structure, for example, that may not have appropriate elevations in terms of framing, and we are dealing with a situation regarding noise in our neighborhood, and we feel that the venting and HVAC consideration is potentially not in line with the wording and the language inside this particular bylaw. So, for example, if it were in an interior type of situation, I don't believe that this bylaw would cover that particular aspect. So that's one piece. Another piece I'd bring to your attention is that the materials are not clearly defined, and therefore what is screening exactly and what would one surround this HVAC with is open to debate in terms of the definition of screening. And I haven't looked at the definition to that just yet, but my thought is that my knowledge is that there is multiple types of dampening that can be put into place. Whether or not it works and how that reflects on the prevailing area are two very different things. Unfortunately, the current bylaws for noise don't account for an actual measurement at this time, and therefore this particular bylaw amendment may not be effective without the long-term facet of potentially having a decibel measurement and a threshold to be had in order to protect the residents in what we are in as a transitional area. I do and have done research on other municipalities and what they have in place to protect the residents, and that comes by way of good neighbor bylaws, as well as amendments to noise, as well as the zoning and development bylaws that they have in place. I'm happy to speak to an example if you'd like, or I can just stop.
It's certainly your prerogative to speak to the example if you'd like, so.
Yes?
Sure.
Okay. Just bear with me just one moment.
Yeah,
excuse
no
me.
problem.
This is one of an example that's echoed through multiple municipalities and seems to be one that's generally has a similar language throughout, both in emerging smaller communities as well as larger municipalities as well. Land and structures shall be used for the uses permitted in this zone only if such do not emit noise in excess of 70 decibels measured at any point on any boundary of a lot on which the use is located, provided that where a lot abuts a lot other than industrial lot, the noise level shall not exceed 60 decibels. That's an example I'm seeing throughout, and it might be something to adopt. I do realize that this doesn't reflect directly to this particular piece. However, there's a short-term and a long-term aspect, I believe, that requires consideration, and this is an opportunity to bring it up to Mayor and Council and staff.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Staff want to perhaps address some of the comments that Mr. DeBrule brought up?
So the purpose of the amendment is to capture HVAC units, which we often see outside of the building, unenclosed. What the speaker has referred to, it sounds like a noise bylaw regulation, which our noise bylaw does not currently regulate in terms of decibels. So it's somewhat unrelated to this current amendment. the amendment that we have today would essentially require a solid wall around the unit to at least the height, the very top of the unit or higher.
And so if council were to address a decibel level, it would be done in the noise bylaw?
Would have to be done in noise bylaw, and we would have to then set up for that enforcement, because then you have to get into measuring noise levels, which we currently don't.
And I'm wondering if I could just get some clarification on, Mr. Rule was talking about internal noises within a building. This bylaw isn't intended to deal with what is theoretically a strata issue. I'm just trying to understand what the issue is.
Yeah, so normally HVAC units, to my knowledge, limited knowledge, would mostly be outside of the building, and that's where we've seen some of the conflicts. Now, it's possible that the HVACs could be inside of the building emitting noise past the walls, but perhaps the scenario that the speaker was speaking to was a unit that's not located in a greenhouse or something like that, something that is not a building that has solid walls. So this would only, again, this would require, in this case, if there are no walls around this HVAC unit, just plastic, it would still require screening.
Right, okay. I think I understand. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to Mr. DeBrule? Did you want to address something else? You don't have to. You do have to go up there if you're going to speak, though, but I'm not forcing you to speak if you don't want to.
I just would like to clarify
Sure, come on up.
a point there. So
You wait till you get to the podium, please.
just want to clarify the point in terms of the actual bylaw speaking to all four sides and up to a certain point. The property in question has a nursery on the lot, and therefore, again, the concern is around there being sufficient screening in order to mitigate. However, if it's propelled, if a unit in a nursery, it's not uncommon to see the units propelled in various non-conforming standard ways. Therefore, I don't believe the bylaw will capture the aim of what it's trying to achieve. And again, would just bring that to the attention of Mayor and Council and staff, because as we know, nurseries are a prevailing and upcoming and emerging industry, and it would be a good opportunity to address that particular issue if there's going to be a residential facet involved within the prevailing area. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the intent of this bylaw wasn't to capture that, but it's a good point because, you know, we're constantly going through these corrections within our bylaws, so we capture things like that. But the intent of this bylaw, you're right, wasn't designed for this, for the particular instance you're talking about. Important thing to bring forward. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this bylaw? Council, any clarification questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next one.
Switch. Thanks, Mayor Heitzman. So the next bylaw on the docket is bylaw number 2513-2016. These are the downtown commercial amendments for commercial space and downtown setbacks. So I'm first going to cover the downtown commercial space. This amendment proposes 3 changes for all downtown commercial C4 and Artisan Village C10 zone properties. First is that it's clarifying that a commercial use is required along all street frontages at grade. Second, it's adding a requirement for an additional floor of commercial use along all frontages. This could be on the 2nd floor or any other floor. And thirdly, requiring that the commercial units be a minimum of 10 meters in depth, which is considered to be a viable depth to support a wide variety of commercial uses.
I'll make it.
The commercial uses may permit any non-residential, non-parking use that is otherwise permitted in the C4 or C10 zones. So this can include things like office space, childcare, retail, personal service establishments, restaurants, school or assembly, artisan or arts and culture uses. This proposed amendment is aligned with the OCP policies that promote downtown as our central core of the community, within which office, retail, and service commercial development is encouraged to concentrate, as well as the draft downtown neighborhood plan, which envisions second-story commercial uses throughout our downtown commercial core. The proposed amendment to the downtown commercial space would apply to the C4 and C10 zones, and these are highlighted on the map in red and yellow. Okay, next I'll discuss the downtown setback proposed changes. So these are changes proposed downtown to the C4 and C10 zones for setbacks for properties abutting Pemberton, Victoria, Vancouver, 2nd Avenue, and 3rd Avenue. It's proposed to increase the front setback along these streets to achieve our active transportation goals, such as widening our sidewalks, adding bike lanes and street trees, while maintaining on-street parking. This amendment proposes increasing the front setback, which is currently 0 meters, to 2.5 meters to allow more space for the streetscape. And this front setback increase has been balanced out with a rear lane setback reduction from 3.5 meters down to 1 meter to ensure that there is no loss of buildable or developable area. So these proposed setback amendments apply within the C4 and C10 zones only to those properties that abut Pemberton, Victoria, Vancouver, 2nd and 3rd Avenues within the area highlighted in red on the map below. Staff has done analysis of the space that would be needed to meet standards for pedestrian space and bike lanes as per our active transportation plan, while maintaining on-street parking, as well as providing buffers between all of these various uses. And we've determined that all of these things can only be accommodated within a 25-meter cross-section. This slide illustrates the difference between a 20-meter wide roadway, which is on the top, and a 25-meter roadway on the bottom. With the 25 meters, you get wider sidewalks, parking on both sides of the street, bike lanes, more street trees, and larger buffers in between the uses. Please note that these images are a preliminary example. Not every street would have this exact same cross-section shown here. The intention is that different streets would have different focuses. On 2nd Avenue, the focus would be on pedestrians. On 3rd and Pemberton, the active transportation plan recommends separated bike lanes, and so bikes would be the focus on those two streets. Having 25 meters to work with rather than 20 meters means that active transportation infrastructure can be provided while maintaining on-street parking on both sides of the street. It's important to note that we cannot accommodate 2 parking lanes with separated bike lanes all within the 20-meter right-of-way.
Hold on a moment, please.
I think I better call conflict on this one. Because I got property on one of those streets. And it didn't affect the C10, but I think it affects me on this, so. Sorry.
Okay, I'll continue. So this map is from the original downtown survey, and it illustrates that Cleveland and Avenue both have 25-meter road right-of-ways, and it's not our intention to have these setbacks apply to either of those streets. But unfortunately, it's the rest of the downtown streets that have the 20-meter road right-of-way and cannot accommodate all of the streetscape changes that are proposed. I just wanted to note that no setback changes are proposed for Cleveland. It's not impacting the properties on Cleveland Avenue. The setback changes were initially proposed for first and second readings on all of these streets that I've listed several times. But we've had a look, and arising from the downtown truck route study, we found that because Main Street is the 25 meters, that this would be a better location for a bike corridor for the bike lanes. And therefore, staff are recommending that council actually remove Victoria and Vancouver streets from the bylaw This change would mean that the only streets the setback changes would apply to would be Pemberton, 2nd, and 3rd Avenue. So it's these 3 streets that we're proposing council make a motion to change.
Can you clarify where on Pemberton it's affected?
So it's...
Is it west of Cleveland, not east of Cleveland?
Exactly. So the cutoff is
And
Cleveland in the middle
so
of things.
Pemberton up to 4th, from Cleveland
Yeah,
over to 4th.
yeah. So the Mohawk gas station would be affected, but Corsa, Cycles, and Mountain Cafe would not be included. Keep going.
Okay.
So this slide is meant to demonstrate that, and just reinforce that there will be no loss of developable area for the majority of the affected lots, because it's just shifting the building envelope essentially from the front closer to the rear lane. Now the exception for this are the 3 properties that we've highlighted in red on this map. So the 2 corner lots on Pemberton and 2nd Avenue, as well as the, I think it's the Bank of Montreal property. And because they're corner lots, essentially they are affected by both Pemberton and 2nd Avenues. So this just shows in detail, this is the existing, under the current bylaw, this is the building envelope. This would, in purple, would be the new building envelope. The green is the gain in area, and then the red is the loss. So this demonstrates that these lots are being impacted by the proposed changes, and these are the only lots. To summarize our public comments, we received 12 comments as of 4 p.m. today. I think there were a few later submissions. And the concerns are mainly around the negative impacts to property values, impacts to existing and future businesses downtown, and any new or redevelopment opportunities, as well as lack of public consultation has been cited. So that's the presentation summary.
Council, any questions? I have a question. Can you put 3rd Avenue up there?
Like the full map?
Ooh, if you have the full map, that'd
Yeah.
be great. So this one's, okay.
Sorry. How about this?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
on 3rd, there is some C4 and C10 zoning on that currently, correct? So it, in theory, would affect some properties on that street, but a lot of 3rd Avenue is zoned residential currently, correct?
Correct.
And there's already a significantly larger setback in those residential zones
Correct.
already? I just wanted to clarify that. Council, any questions? Councilor Elliott?
Just on Pemberton, you know, a few weeks ago, we were talking about waterfront landing and an eventual Pemberton crossing. And so is the road right away wide enough to accommodate what we're imagining that will be an access point and crossing that from Line Channel mentioned? So I see that your setbacks are applying to west of Cleveland, but
You're wondering between Cleveland all the way to the proposed crossing.
correct.
Does our
Because the
engineer
truck
want
study-
to
The truck
address
study
this?
shows that as a medium-term option. And I realize we can change some things because of the truck study, so I'm wondering why. I just want to make sure we're thinking about that portion of our action conversation as well.
Someone want to answer that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Heinzman. It's a really good point. I actually hadn't thought of that yet.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, however, we have in our minds, like at least we have a placeholder for the idea that we are going to have to look in more detail at Pemberton beyond Cleveland towards the proposed bridge more carefully, like in the very near future, because yes, we're aware that we've got a lot of interest going on there, and also there's some different uses, current uses, and probably changing uses going on that block as well. That's going to need to be looked at a bit more closely. than it has been so far. Thanks for bringing that up.
Any other questions for clarification purposes from council? I have quite a list of speakers on this particular bylaw. First up, I have Avtar Giri, and then Alex Zabar is next. So please state your name and your neighborhood that you live in, and whether you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Yes, my name is Avtar Giri. I've been resident of downtown Squamish for 40 years. I own the property on the corner of 3rd and Victoria. This new setback going to affect my property big time. Currently, I am in an agreement for sale, but this new setback may jeopardize the sale of my property. And I have a question for the council. Since there are buildings recently built from all the way from every intersection from Cleveland to the 4th Avenue, how would you achieve what you're trying to achieve with the new setbacks?
Thank you for your question.
I mean, there are recently built, like there's a building
Is that a
behind
question
me.
through the staff? Council's here to listen, so is that a
Yeah,
question
I
through the
mean,
staff?
whoever is able to answer, that's my question.
So
There are recently built building on every intersection from Cleveland to 4th Avenue, but the new setback will affect new development, concern my property as well.
So I think, do you understand the question? Okay. Sure, go ahead, please.
Try and answer it. So the setback will not apply to buildings that are already there, obviously. But what we're trying to prevent is the loss of the potential for streetscape in long terms, and not just in the next few years, but in the next 20 and 50 years. And also recognizing that, yeah, there will be some pinch points in the streets where, we might lose out on having street trees in those sections. So the proposed changes will apply to the property on 3rd Avenue, but because staff are proposing to take off Victoria Street, that means that the building will just simply shift away from the from 3rd Avenue towards the lane in the back. So it wouldn't actually lose any buildable area. It would just have to shift the building back.
Yeah, but I'm also under the process of developing that property. So if you need setback on the Victoria Street for my property, you have to go zigzag on the Victoria Avenue or Victoria Street to achieve your bike lane or your tree lines.
So Mr. Geary, we've taken off the setback on Victoria Street. It no longer exists. So on your affected property, it's only on 3rd Avenue, and perhaps staff can go to the slide that, so essentially you had a setback at the front and a setback at the back. It's now simply, so if you watch this up here, so you have the same buildable footprint, just moving it closer to the back lot line. And the corners, we've taken off the corners on Victoria and Vancouver Street.
The setback has to be the property front wall going the setback, or? Because I've been told that something like verandas on this 2nd Avenue and Vancouver, Main Street, setback or something similar to that. Is that the case?
I'm not sure, Jonas?
Maybe, I'm not sure if I understand the question. If you could
I've been told that
clarify.
the reason behind is for these setback, when the commercial stores open their door, they are opening into the snow. And something like this artisan on the library, they have verandas all around the building. They have a place to put the chairs on, people sit and have coffees. And I've been told that setback is the reason for those kind of.
So this setback will certainly benefit some of the commercial uses, because there will be more streetscape to do, spill out onto the sidewalk essentially.
Something like that is the setback, or the first front wall has to be straight back from the front property line? 2.5 meter.
Yeah, can't do.
Oh, I see. Cantilever, I guess.
No, the setback applies to
No,
the...
this setback would apply to the
face of the
entire
building.
building face.
Uh,
Yeah.
And my understanding is that part of that is to allow for street trees and the landscaping within that. But, and I'm just confirming this is, except for those 3 lots facing onto Pemberton Street on corners, it's not changing the buildable footprint, it's moving it back. So that may still be an issue for some people, absolutely, but just to clarify, your footprint is not changing.
Even on the
Correct?
3rd Avenue, 3rd and Victoria, right across from my corner, there's a new recently built building, 4-story. That is right on the property line, and that will affect any 3rd Avenue setback.
It's true, there are a number of fairly recent buildings
Yeah.
throughout this area, and what we find with some of those buildings is that they have very narrow sidewalks. 2nd Avenue is probably a great example where the sidewalk is only 1.5 meters wide, and it's maybe not sufficient for, to be a really business-friendly environment. You can't have a lot of signage on the sidewalk. There isn't room to spill out in a cafe. It's limited in that space, and doesn't leave room for active transportation goals to be met while maintaining on-street parking. So without that setback area, there's a compromise to be made somewhere. And if you don't have that extra space, it's loss of parking or loss of that sort of pedestrian-friendly or business-friendly sidewalk space. And for those existing buildings, maybe that's what we'd like to see change for the future. So this proposed bylaw is thinking very, very long-term. And there will be buildings.
I could understand
will
if
stay.
those buildings are 50 years old, they may be torn down soon, but those are like 2 years, 3 years old building. They will be there for 100 years or so.
Okay.
And how are you going to have the setback effect of when there is a building right on the property, but then next new one you want 8 feet back?
So one of the options may be that we lose on-street parking in front of those buildings, and we actually have different curb lines in order to accommodate sidewalk area, a larger sidewalk area. So there's going to be potentially some retrofit that won't be perfect, but at least it's better than simply going forward making the same inadequate designs that we have around town.
Mr. Geary, you'll have lots of opportunity to come back. I've got a big list, so if it's okay, I'll move on. You can absolutely come back and ask more questions and make more comments.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Alex Zbar, and then on deck is Sandra Daveheisel.
Thank you. My name is Alex Zavar. I live in Vancouver. I represent myself and my company, MLW Ventures Limited. My family has, I've prepared a letter. I'm only going to read some small parts of it. I'm not going to take up a lot of time. My family has owned and operated commercial properties in downtown Squamish since 1965. The imposition of a 2.5 meter setback from the property lines, I believe it's from the property lines, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Where they are fronting on streets, I think is short-sighted and unfair to the property owners. I think discouraging development by changing the zoning is the wrong approach. I think that's the long-term plan, or the short-term plan, to discourage development so you can get ahead of development proposals that are coming in right now. Particularly hit, well, my company owns 175 feet of contiguous frontage on Cleveland Avenue, and more on the corner of 2nd Avenue in Winnipeg. Particularly hard hit is the property on 2nd and Winnipeg. That particular property houses 4 spaces out of the 13 commercial spaces that I now own. The laneway allowance really does nothing for this property if Winnipeg Street is still part of this change. Now, I don't see it on the list there. Has Winnipeg Street been deleted from this change?
It was never on
It was never part of the proposal, but Victoria and Vancouver have been taken out. So the only streets affected by setbacks are where you see the blue in the current proposal.
Okay. My original understanding was that Winnipeg Street was part of this.
Yeah, no, it was never part of this.
Okay, there's some confusion here, and I think the confusion is general. There's a lot of people here in the room who do not have a complete understanding of what's being proposed, so it needs to be defined much more clearly. I think the proposed setbacks for my property, if my understanding is correct, or if it's not correct, either way, it will reduce the allowable footprint by about 30% and eliminate more than half the parking. Resulting allowable building dimensions will be economically unsuitable for redevelopment and will decrease its future commercial capacity from 4 stores to 2. Property will then become likely unsellable. It would also no longer conform to the minimum 10-meter depth. I think this approach will prevent developers from building to their desired and expected potential. They'll stop considering downtown for any activity at all, now and in the future. It'll harm property values. It'll make the downtown less attractive to shoppers, and the number of vacancies will increase. Most of my tenants are family-owned and operated businesses. The vast majority of them came to Squamish from all over the world. We proudly say that more than 40 businesses have been successfully launched from our properties alone in the last 50 years. If I can't succeed with my properties, my tenants cannot succeed in my properties. When I consider redeveloping, I need the ability to build on the existing footprints. By imposing unrealistic setbacks such as this, I think is counterintuitive. It's really expropriation. We started here by redeveloping the old Squamish taxi stand, the one taxi that was in this town. That's what was parked on our property. We redeveloped that, and it's now the hot spot on Cleveland. I was 15 years old at the time. We didn't spend the last 50 years struggling to make Squamish a better place to live, just to have our viability challenged by an ill-considered bylaw. I ask you, please, to rethink the logic you used to formulate this bylaw, because I think there must be better ways to achieve your long-term goal. And that's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Please, I'm afraid you can't clap during a public meeting. We want to make sure there's no intimidation whatsoever, so everyone has an opportunity to speak their mind. Appreciate the support, Mr. DeVar, but I would ask you to just refrain from clapping. Thank you very much. There were a few comments made, and I'd just like some clarification if possible. Mr. Zabar talked about minimum 10-meter depth, and I'm not 100% sure what he was referring to.
Okay, do you want me to go into that story?
And I do want to make it clear that this public hearing isn't addressing the Cleveland Avenue height. That is, it's at first reading, it's going out to public consultation. I suspect there'll be lots of feedback and amendments to that as it moves forward, or if it does move forward. So that's not being contemplated tonight at all. So we are talking, I think Mr. Zabar is talking specifically about the setback issues in this bylaw.
So in this bylaw 2513, there's the requirement for commercial space at grade with a minimum 10-meter unit depth. And I believe that's what he's speaking
Yeah.
to.
10 meters deep horizontal, not vertical.
Sorry, you have to go and speak to the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, horizontally. Yeah.
So just to say that again, it's a 10-meter depth horizontally, not vertically.
Correct.
So at grade.
Correct.
None of the stores in that particular property could achieve the 10-meter depth with the new setbacks. Go down from 4 stores to 2. The property was originally built to house 5 stores. I've made some changes to it where it is now maximum 4. With the additional setbacks, it would go down to 2, and we would lose half the parking. That's on-lot, on-site parking.
Mr. Yeah.
So if it's a setback issue, then the setbacks do change on this property, but they don't impact the buildable area. As with previous comments, the building just has to move. Buildable area just moves back towards the lane. So it's not an issue with setbacks. The 10-meter requirement for commercial space is a standard. It's a North American standard for commercial space to be 10 meters deep. And we've seen that done with other developments, on both smaller properties and larger properties downtown. So that's where the 10-meter requirement comes from. The reason, the way the bylaw is drafted as well is it anticipates that some lots might be challenged with parking. And so it is possible through the development permit process to vary that depth requirement.
Thank you. There's still lots of opportunity to come back if you want to speak to it. I have next up Sandra and Dave Heisler, or Sandra Rule and Dave Heisler, and then on deck is Byron Meyer. You're next.
Mayor, council, staff.
I'll ask you to speak into the microphone, please. Sorry. And state your general neighborhood that you live in, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
We live at Hospital Hill, on Hospital Hill. We own Horses Cycles, so we're representing our business and our property. I have to say that I am completely confused by all this particular bylaw, because I did think that it was affecting our property. I'm still uncertain that it might if it goes west of Cleveland. East of Cleveland. So I guess it's been hard with all these current bylaw changes that have come out, and I feel that we've been uneducated possibly, or uninformed of how all of these changes are hit the deck. And it's kind of worrisome, because it really would affect our property values, ours and a lot of people in this room. And I just want to ask staff and council, yes, I understand we want a town that looks a lot better than what we've had for the last 100 years or whatever, but is it not important to take into consideration stakeholders that would be greatly affected by all of this? And I'm still unclear if possibly with this particular setback, if it would affect our property. And if it did, I couldn't really see how we could redevelop our land anywhere in the near future, because it would make it impossible. And just speaking to the second floor commercial space, I agree with that. That's part of this, right? See, again, I'm confused because it's...
Got closer to the microphone, please. Thank you.
I'm just hoping Dave's going to jump in here.
He'll kick you out of the way.
On the muscle.
No, I'm just wondering if other bylaws that are sort of went back, the rescinded one was to come forward again, how this particular bylaw, I just feel like this is all piecemealed together, and there should be a clearer process of making one storyboard. I'm looking for a storyboard for everybody involved, not just stakeholders. And I've been here a long time. I do want to see these changes, but I think it should be with everybody involved.
Thank you. Mr. Mussel, do you want to add something?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Byron Meyer, and on deck is Tajinder Bular.
Good evening. My name is Björn Meyer. I live in Vernon, and the property that we own is at 38065 Cleveland Avenue. My wife and I, this is an important thing for us. We've traveled for 6 hours, 520 kilometers, and I can feel every one of them. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm not sure what in the functions of a municipality has given rise to the fact that apparently unelected bureaucrats and elected councillors you can't look at it any other way than steal property values from owners without even advising them. It's a great big disappointment, and I think a couple of these previous speakers, the last lady and Mr. Zubar, mentioned that we are confused, we have little or no knowledge, we haven't had the decency to receive a single notice from the municipality about what they were planning to do. My wife and I purchased our property in 1990, and this is a big part of our pension, and we have always had it with the idea in mind that we would like to redevelop it. I have always seen a retail on the ground floor and perhaps a couple of stories of residential up above to create something like similar to Whistler, where people live upstairs and they commute and communicate with one another, they shop and move around their town to create a livable town. We are all very disappointed. I was listening to the planning department tonight. All of a sudden they tell us that apparently Cleveland Avenue is not included in this setback. This is news to me. The only reason I had any communication was Sabrina, or here somewhere. It was good enough to send me a copy of one of the bylaws. So the first thing I would like to say is to make a mention of is that surely to goodness we deserve to be involved when you're trying to take away values from our properties. I have been told that the planner had stated that the downzoning could be accomplished without notifying the owners. Even if that is true, which I find very hard to believe, but if that is true, there's something called natural law that should tell everybody, council members or other people, that it goes against any type of common sense to take something from someone on such a basis. So with this as a background, you'll understand why many of us have a difficulty trusting the judgment of council. Now, with respect to the specific bylaws, the setback, if that doesn't affect or it doesn't impact Cleveland Avenue, then we perhaps could be forgiven for heaving a sigh of relief. But I think council should be aware that with a 2.5 meter setback, I calculated on our 50-foot lot, the 2.5 meter is about 8.2 feet times 50. That's 410 square feet of land that we would lose the usability of. In terms of a loss situation, if we had built a building on that, and we had an FSR, floor space ratio, of 1 for the property, that means we would forego 410 square feet of building at an average cost for land and buildings of about $500 per square foot. We would lose a value of $205,000. Now you multiply that by the number of property owners in the area, and you begin to see what Mr. Zubar was mentioning, that if any of these setbacks are forced through, it will no longer be economical for owners to develop the properties, nor will it be economical for businesses to operate businesses. You will invite the creation of a cemetery of stores on Cleveland. In addition, as a small point too, some buildings have already been built with no setback, so they will stick out from the rest and disturb the sight lines.
Councillor Chappelle, do you mind passing your and a glass of water? Help you out there?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot my coffee.
That's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I know that the planners are suggesting that the 2.5 meter setback, you will compensate by allowing them to build within a meter of the back, but I would suggest that that is very, there's very limited usability of that, because number one, you've got to have some parking. Number two, 2 or 3 story buildings will in many cases try to create parking, drive into parking on the second level. And you're going to be right back in the lane doing that. So I would suggest that that's very impractical and very expensive. And the municipality, by pushing the 2.5 meter setback, will force the owners of the building or the tenants to purchase expensive parking from the municipality. And I don't know whether you're still selling that or not, but in any event, it will create more hardships on the property owner and the business owners. I think that's all I wanted to say about this particular one, and I just have a couple of comments in regards to the, if I understand, again, because we received no written material, I get various interpretations. I'm told that office will be compulsory on the second floor. In reading, quite frankly, I think the proposed bylaw needs rewriting by somebody who can make it a little more understandable to people. If you insist on office use on the second floor, I'm sorry, but I would have to call it stupid. Because what if there is no market for office? The municipality cannot start to dictate to the market what the market is going to do. On the other hand, I believe there's a huge demand for one-bedroom apartments in Squamish. In many other markets, there is a huge demand for apartments combined with workspace. My wife and I have just been a trip to Seattle, and you perhaps know Seattle is a gigantic high-tech market. One of the companies is just in the process of hiring another 12,000 high-tech workers for Seattle alone. And in Seattle, there's a lot of developments of apartments combined with work areas. And this is one thing that actually my wife and I had planned to do. We haven't gotten around to it because of high taxes and a few other things, but instead of saying that it has to be the office on the second floor, why not be a little bit more flexible and say that it could be a combination of office and residential and so forth, and try to cater to that market. When I wrote this, my comments, without realizing it, I said, and my wife suggested I should read this out. In summary, it's hard to imagine such an unholy mess. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Tejinder Bhullar, and on deck is William Chen. Welcome, state your name and your home address or your home neighborhood, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Hello, Mayor. Hello, Council. Hello, members. My name is Tejinder Bhullar, and I am representing my company, Mickey Enterprises, and VMD. We right on the Cleveland Avenue, and I was not aware that now it's been changed, but I was so surprised, and we were shocked by reading the paper one night morning. It came to our door. It says Cleveland setbacks and also the bylaws with the heights. And we were shocked. And if it's ever happened, this will be very negative for our property. We have big dreams. We've been working with the hard times, but Squamish have seen in August Jackson's all Cleveland was downsizing or downgrading. Now Cleveland is, since the new development happened, new improvement happens, it's looking better. So if more comes, it will help. It will look beautified, and that's what dream I have. So which I say, I thought one day we will build a hospital on our, where you see community garden now for seniors, That's my dream is, I hope one day come true, because I thought this will help, that's our community need. Or maybe pretty soon we need it. And that's all I can say. I'm sorry, I'm not a public speaker. I can't clarify more than that, that I am shocked, our family shocked. If ever happens, please don't let it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, you did really well. You're a good public speaker. Next up, William Chan, and on deck is Howard Chan. Welcome.
Thank you. Because I'll put my extra pair of glasses on. Yes. So my name is William Chan. I am property owners along Cleveland Avenue. I don't have the opportunity of seeing some of the slides that are presented here today. And I wish I had those previously before I come to this meeting, because that would make a lot of clarity to my situation. I realize that Cleveland Avenue to some degree are not affected by the setback. But however, the second floor restriction on business only is going to be affected. And furthermore, I know it is not talking about reductions here, but I think in respect of the setback, which reduces commercial floor space, as much as you are saying that it doesn't, the fact is, as one speaker has said earlier, that a setback in this situation could impact the amount of parking space in the rear. So in order to accomplish or achieve more parking space, your floor space has to be reduced somehow, right? So that would affect that. And so again, the second floor restriction is going to be a problem in terms of the fact that there is currently not much strong demand in downtown Squamish. Okay, so why are you putting something like that in place? Why not let the market drive the situation? So rather, I think it should be either a mixture of residential or business applications. And furthermore, residential provides housing for those who do work in that neighborhood, and also a chance for them to live there as well. You like it or not, the more residents that live there will provide housing for, so we would provide more eyes on the street for better safety and also prevent drug injuries, because that's a problem in downtown to some degree. More residential and higher density, as I refer back to the height reduction, relieve the current height rental market. So the restriction on business on the second floor really runs against that concept. More residential translates to more pedestrians that attracts more shoppers, creating a more vibrant neighborhood. So I want you to understand that currently Squamish is not really, to my point of view, a very vibrant neighborhood. How can we encourage that? To do that, you have to encourage more pedestrians, more shoppers going around that area. So downtown business, right, for the past many years have been struggling up and down continuously. And those businesses are not comprised of many big quality businesses to anchor this area in order to attract more businesses as well as more quality shoppers. So, bottom line, downtown Squamish is not as vibrant as many of you think it is. I think the council is trying to worsen the situation. Setback and second floor business only, bottom line, limits the size and use of the buildings. This also limits the potential for new businesses that need more commercial retail space, more office space, and more residential requirements. Setback, second floor business will, setback and second floor business restriction with setback, unintended, the current OCP's vision to make downtown Squamish the business hub that it wants to be. Setback and second business restriction will stymie the growth and business activity will risk being cannibalized by oceanfront development. And I really don't know if, in fact, oceanfront development has any aspect of causing this discussion at this point in time. By limiting the growth, potential for increased property and business tax revenues are being restricted and will hurt the city's ability to enhance all areas of city services. Setback and second floor business restriction would devalue my properties. Such a policy, I think, is unfair and discriminatory. So, I don't believe you, as councillors, if you were personally affected by the proposed changes, then you would wholeheartedly agree to sacrifice your investments. So why would you want to stir the pot? In summary, please, I urge you to stop this bylaw. Instead, relegate your resources to improve whatever you can to improve the vitality of downtown Squamish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Howard Chan is up next, and Scott McQuaid is on deck.
I decline to speak because Alex and Will spoke what I would like to say.
Thank you very much.
If I may, Mayor, there has been a few comments that would be maybe useful to clarify.
Sure.
With relation to the second floor office space, as well as the potential for mixed uses on that floor. So just want to clarify that the bylaw doesn't allow it to be on the second, doesn't require it to be on the second floor. It could be on any other floor. And you could have residential uses on that same floor, as long as you provide it along the frontage of the street, the office space. So you could have parking on the second floor with a few residential units, and then a story with other commercial uses and residences in behind.
Okay. And I can come back to you. I'll put you back on the list if that's all right.
No, I just want to be a comment.
Yeah, I'll put you back on the list if that's all right. Mr. McQuaid, I think there's a few other questions that came out there too, and you can speak as many times as you want. So we'll go Mr. McQuaid, and next up is Fred Chan.
Okay, thank you for hearing me. As I mentioned in emails to all of you that you've received, there's an incredible
So
amount.
Scott, just can you just state where you live?
Scott McQuaid, I live on Thunderbird Ridge. I own property on 2nd Avenue.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in emails to all of you, there's an incredible amount of confusion around this bylaw, as I'm sure you can discern for yourself. After the height restriction, 2515 was quickly introduced and then just as quickly rescinded. It left many people with the impression that 2513 was also rescinded. So there's many people who aren't here tonight who had belief that 2513 was rescinded. I've been getting messages all week. Oh, great, we're all good, right? Everything's fine. Well, no, it's not. We're still dealing with setbacks here. And the reason for that is there's just not the right amount of public engagement. I've had no letter as of yet. I have a P.O. box, which I check every couple of weeks. That's as a lot of people do in Squamish. So I've never received a letter. If it wasn't for the good reporting of Jen Dunshire, the chief, I wouldn't know anything. So thank you for good local newspapers. The other thing I'd like to say is I'd like you to refer you to Mr. Kaminsky's letter with regards to balancing. I know we talked a lot about balancing, giving up 2.5 meter setback on the front to get it on the back. In my mind, that's not balance. And refer to his letter, and it shows how it doesn't work. The formula doesn't work. It's not a fair. That's not a fair trade by any means. A positive contributor to discuss the downtown in many ways, as many people in this room, and we feel that without any consultation, you're arbitrarily devaluing our land, and we find that that's just no way to govern. You've got to engage us. The bylaw has had far too large of an impact on small business people like myself. This is not a simple housekeeping item. There are serious changes to private property you're proposing, and you need to go through a thorough public engagement process that needs to be adhered to, like an OCP. We have an OCP that's less than 9 years old, and it's not perfect. I'll agree, it's not a perfect OCP, but it's not outdated. So let's respect the OCP. Let's respect the document, right? As we hope that future councils will respect the document that you guys are working on now. But you've got to have more engagement. This is not a way to govern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQuaid. Fred Chan is next, and Eugene Chan is on deck.
I'm Fred Chan. I live in Burnaby. I have interest on government or on Cleveland. First, let me say that I came here to address a totally different problem, and that's part of the problem: the lack of communication. A large percentage of the people in here are here on to complain and talk about stuff that's not even on tonight's agenda, and I find that's disappointing that the council didn't impart more information ahead of time. How is that any kind of way to run government? Now, as far as the setback goes, it's true the planners say you're shifting from the front to the back. However, in practice, that is not true. Have you ever looked at the size of a garbage bin? They're more than 1 meter. If you put that garbage bin at the back of the property, it extends into the lane. If everybody's got their garbage cans in the lane, how is the garbage truck supposed to go through? In order to run a business, you need to have trucks pull up to the back of your building. If you have 1 meter setback at the lane, your truck is blocking the whole lane. Nobody else will be able to use that lane. This idea does not work. Now, another problem is the second floor thing. There's no information. I came here thinking that the whole problem here is there's a limit to having building height, that you're only allowed to have a second story. Whoever heard of a downtown district with only 2-story buildings? I mean, that might work if you're, I don't know, in field or something, but hopefully Squamish is aiming for a bigger town, eventually to become a city. If you have ever gone down to, say, Palm Desert, you have nice buildings. They look a lot like that one on the corner there on Cleveland. You have commercial on the main floor. You have business on the second floor. You have residential on the top floor. You have a vibrant community that way. You have people living there all the time. They can keep an eye on the streets. You have a viable business happening down below. I mean, you all remember what Squamish was like a few years ago. There was a dead town out there. Nobody on the streets. Even now, you look out there at nighttime, there's nobody out there. You want people to be out there all the time. And now, when the store owners are coming back, having some prosperity, the last thing you want to do is stifle it and turn it back into a ghost town. In closing, I just hope that council imparts more information ahead of time so that we have a chance to study it, rather than having people come in from out of town to talk about issues that aren't even on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eugene Chan, and then Damien Lustig is the last name on my list. Actually, I think there's another one.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Eugene Chan. I live in Richmond. And it's no coincidence that some of the other speakers also share my same last name. As a family, we have owned real estate interests in Squamish going back at least 15 years. So we're not Johnny-come-latelys at Squamish. We have very high expectations of Squamish. We were very excited by the oceanfront developments and all the things that were going on. with the revitalization of the downtown community. However, things did not progress as we would like to see them progress, but it's never too late. First, I have a couple of questions to ask of the planning department. With the setback situation, am I, as a property owner, allowed to build over top that setback to the edge of my property on the second floor?
The setback applies to the whole face of the building. And the
All right,
purpose of
thank you.
that is to allow for street trees.
Both on the front setback and the rear setback.
All right. Since I still own the property on the setback, if I have a restaurant, can I put tables and chairs out there on setback? If I have a retail store, can I put clothes racks out on that setback?
Yes, that remains private property.
All right, thank you very much. Anyway, I think Fred and Willie expressed concerns that Squamish doesn't represent the vision of an emerging and forward-thinking community with downsizing the central downtown core. That flies against the face of every well, let's just say that it just doesn't make sense. With the requirement to put a second level of commercial on the affected areas, what is the rationale for that? You don't have enough business here in the first place, and your primary need is for rental housing stock. So it seems very logical to allow residential development on the second floor. In every area throughout North America, and I just came back from Australia, there isn't a planning department that wants to downsize. Even the smallest coastal town in Australia doesn't want to downsize their most important part of their region. So I would suggest to council that they consider this to be a very backward-moving decision. Now, I'm very pleased to find out that the setbacks do not involve Cleveland. That was not made clear in any information at hand prior to this meeting. But I do have a confusion because the bylaw also states that within other C4 zonings that this setback will also apply. So can planning give me a clarification on that?
Yeah, it applies to all C4 and C10 zone properties on 2nd, 3rd, or Pemberton within that downtown area.
So the bylaws will be amended to state that specifically and not the current situation where it just says that all C4 properties are subject to this setback provision?
The proposed bylaw states it correctly with the exception of Vancouver and Victoria Streets, which we recommend be removed.
All right. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I'm sure that council will make the right decision.
Thank you very much. Damien Lustig and on the next one. I believe this is the last one on my list, so if you do want to speak at the public hearing, please just put your hand up and I'll make sure we get to everybody. Go ahead.
Hello again. I'm Damien Lustig. I live at 37767 2nd Avenue. I represent myself as well as several businesses that we operate between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. I don't envy you guys at all. I know how hard it is to do this kind of stuff and be berated and treated like you did something stupid, but that's where we are. You haven't met the expectations of stakeholders at all. And also, just before I continue, I'd like to say that I thought I knew what was going on when I came in here. I'm so confused. Really, and it takes hours and hours of my time to chase this stuff down. I don't have time. Look at me. I'm going back to work when I'm done here, so I can have my businesses running this summer in my nice industrial neighborhood.
Mr. Lustig, can you just address
Sorry.
the council? It's a public hearing and they're listening. Don't
I'm a
worry.
passionate guy.
Thank you.
Anyhow, it is a down zoning, so it's going to be a loss of investments for many of us. Okay, we bought these properties with the current zoning and knowing what it was gonna be recently. There's a lot of properties that are like that. They're small. They're really small. We gotta make them work. How am I gonna turn a truck into one of these properties? You know, right now, we're an industrial zone where I can weld and I can build trucks. And I can do all kinds of stuff, right? Which is what you should be able to do when you're that close to a port. Like, that's a corridor for industry. That's a corridor for jobs. So we need to maintain that, and we're not gonna do that with this. It's not gonna work at all for my neighborhood. We just took over an entire floor of a building on 3rd Avenue. It's been empty most of its life. Why do we want more offices down there? We need spaces where people can actually build stuff, not farmers market stuff and art and stuff. That's great. And we need those spaces too, but we need to continue to have these spaces where people
Speak to
can...
council, Mr. Lustig.
Sorry, these spaces where you can create and do business. And with this new zoning amendment, it's just going to create chaos. We have a symbiotic relationship in our neighborhood with all the different kinds of things that go on. There's art, there's retail, there's hairdressers, there's woodworkers, there's metal fabricators, there's trucking businesses, there's all kinds of business, all works together. We can't grow as a community with the existing businesses operating the way that we have.
Mr.
With our,
Lustig, look at me. Focus this way. Thank you.
Okay.
This is a public hearing for council.
Sorry.
And I'm protecting staff here because it's really, you need to be addressing us.
all right,
and
I just really
we're-
feel for these guys.
I know. Thank you.
It'll create congestion in our alleyways. You want to put residential behind the alleys, or the residential traffic through the alleys. That's come up before. When we're working back there, and we've got trucks moving things in and out, product, materials, so that we can create things and have them come back out, there's no room to do that when you make a small setback in an area like ours. They're small lots. We need the space that we have so we can continue to work the way that we are and continue to build the businesses that we're building that is making this community vibrant. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There seems to be a little bit of confusion. Maybe staff can speak to the different effect it may have on C10 zoning. I believe Mr. Lustig was mostly talking about the end of 2nd Avenue, and it's mostly industrial in C10 and kind of a mishmash. Just for the clarity of everybody, can you explain a little bit how the setback may or may not affect certain zone properties?
Sure. Mayor Heinzman, through you, the end of 2nd and 3rd Avenue is mostly zoned industrial and they will be impacted. Only the C10 properties may be impacted by the changes, the proposed setback changes, and that will be on 3rd and 2nd Avenues.
Do C10 have a current setback different from C4?
Which one? Sorry.
We're checking that, I believe so.
Yeah, C10 currently has a setback requirement of 6.1 meters, with the exception of a few blocks downtown where the front setback is 1.52 meters.
So just to confirm, on C10 and industrial zones, if the setback is moved back, it's still got a greater setback, so it's not impacting those zones.
There's no proposed change to any of the industrial zones. The C10 zone, it would be a change from 1.52 meters to 2.5 meters.
On the front?
On the front.
I thought you just said it was 6.1 meters.
With the exception of a number of blocks downtown.
I'm confused now.
Yeah, the zoning bylaw right now has a requirement in the C10 zone that the front setback be 6.1 meters, with the exception of block 17, 18, 21, 22, 23, 37, 38, 39, and 40 in District Lot 487, which is most of the downtown blocks.
Okay. So that was the last person on my list. I did see a hand at the back over here. Please come up and state your name and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization, and the general vicinity of where you live.
Hi, my name is Maged Shahata. I represent my company. It's a family company. We own a property in Victoria and 2nd. So I'm glad that Victoria is taking off the setback thing. Now I just have a question that I need to know what's the status of the people who already applied for the development permit with this bylaw, because we already applied a few months ago, so I don't know if this would be applicable on us or not.
I can clarify that. These changes would not apply to your application. Your application is subject to the bylaws as they stood on the day you submitted your application.
So I don't think I have any further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Please come up, state your name and where you live, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Mayor, council, staff. My name is Sabrina Gawley. I live in Vancouver, and I am here representing the Downtown Squamish Business Improvement Association. Membership does not currently have a position on these proposed bylaw amendments, and the reason we don't have a position is because we haven't had substantial time to inform our membership. Further, we can't educate them when it's a moving target. We've seen this evening alone a change to the bylaw, which, and I don't know process. I don't know if you can do that at public hearing or whether that goes back to first or second reading. So, as we've heard, this moving target has led to a lot of miscommunication. I empathize with everyone's position. I understand that you have to make 1,000 different things work together for the betterment of the community. We just need time in order to understand how that impacts our membership. I'd love for planning to, I have individuals approaching me asking me how it impacts them, and I can't possibly analyze all the data and tell them how it specifically impacts each one of their properties or their stores. And I don't think that planning necessarily has the capacity to answer those individual requests either. So I think, even these slides have been extremely beneficial in providing additional information. And these slides aren't something that the public saw prior to this evening. And that's the challenge, is just a lack of information. Councillor Pryor, for example, wasn't sure if he was in conflict or not. And I think that's a prime example of anyone in this room knowing whether this is impacting them or not. In the Paco Road bylaw amendment, it stated that you sent a survey to owners and tenants, that there's been ongoing communication since summer of 2016. We'd expect the same kind of treatment for a bylaw of this magnitude. When I was here for the Development Committee standing meeting a couple weeks ago, the site alteration bylaw, they spoke about IAP2, public participation spectrum. And why wouldn't those be implemented on such an onerous change to a major area? So all we're asking for, again, we're not taking a position at this point, it's just additional information, additional time to consult with our membership so that we can arrive at a position. We understand the objectives that everyone's trying to achieve, and we want to help you work to get there, but we need the information in order to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this public hearing? Just maybe quickly go to staff to see if there's any specific things that need clarification at this point. There was a comment about shifting the building back diminishes the ability for on-site parking. I wonder if you could respond to that comment.
So we do see in some applications parking uncovered in the back lane, but I think the majority of applications that we've seen to date have all requested the variance to that rear setback, and the reason is so that the building can get closer to the rear line. And most of the parking, or on most projects, parking is completely enclosed in the building.
Councillor Spill, do you have a question?
I just had a question about the last speaker said that they hadn't been informed about Cleveland being pulled out of the bylaw, and I'm just wondering if those changes were made before or after the everything went to the public, and if that actually brings it back to first and second reading.
And Cleveland? Well,
Or if there's changes
I think
made that have
that,
been.
yeah, so I think that might be a question for Ms. Arthurs, but because Cleveland was always out of it, but because Victoria and Vancouver have been pulled out, I suspect that it needs to go back to the public on that.
So we did look into that because it's critical from a legal perspective whether we can proceed with the bylaws. And our understanding is that that is the purpose of a public hearing, is so that the council can hear from the public and then changes can happen to the bylaw before it proceeds. So changes would happen at third reading.
No, just to be devil's advocate on this, there may be people who are like, I want those setbacks on those streets, and if we pulled them out, they don't have the ability to comment on that. It's a substantive change that is actually a loosening of the rules, technically, and so the public, in theory, has a right to understand that. I just want to clarify, Ms. Arthurs, you may have to come up, sorry. Technicality or not, council may wish to do whatever they may wish to do on this, but.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Council can choose to go back to second reading and have a deliberation on which streets are in or which streets are out. But before, at the public hearing, you can reduce, based on some of the feedback that has been coming in, you can reduce the requirements. What you can't do is increase the areas or who's being affected, but you can remove from the affected area. It's because it's an omnibus bylaw, so there's spot zoning. It's a little bit different, just a little bit different. But council has the prerogative to go back and actually deliberate on that one.
Let me ruminate on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Councillor Chevelle.
Thanks. So if public information is given and that information is changed in the hearing, it hasn't been changed, it's the information that went out to the public isn't the accurate information. It doesn't change the reading as long as it's reduced, not increased. Is that correct?
Was our understanding.
But don't go away yet. Just again on devil's advocate point, in whose mind is it being reduced or increased? Some people might say, I assume that was going to be in there because I want active transportation on that route, or not. You know what I'm saying? It's a technical point. I'm not arguing.
I think reduced applies to the actual requirement. So they've reduced the number of roads that this change is affecting.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Yeah, come on up and state your name and your neighborhood, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Edward Archibald, I live in Squamish in the Brennan Park area. I represent myself as well as my own business interests. I own land downtown, and I'm in the process of redeveloping it. I'm not affected by this because I'm already in, but one thing I would urge council is there's an OCP review going on right now. This is a fundamental change. There's obviously a ton of confusion even amongst council, let alone the public. I would really urge council to push this back for public consultation as Cleveland Avenue second floor conundrum occurred. I would really urge you to push this back to further public consultation. So at minimum, the landowners and the public are educated on what's going on and who's affected. Some of the slides planning has put up today have been very informative. And they're news to a lot of us today that have created additional confusion. So I would really urge that this goes back to further public consultation or be incorporated into the wider OCP review that's going on right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this bylaw? I don't see any hands. We have one more element, one more bylaw to deal with, so why don't we move on to that one? The public hearing is still open, just so everyone knows. So we're moving on to the mini storage / drive-through, and I have one person on the list for that one. So please, if you're not John Wiles, Just hold on, we're gonna let staff just present the bylaw and then. And does Councillor Pryor need to come back in and declare conflict on this one specifically? Yeah, just to.
Just declared it previously. You talked about it at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
Can you come in and redeclare your
He had his feet up, he was napping. You just have to say you're in conflict and you can go out again.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll go back to sleep.
You have to say it, Councillor Pryor.
Go back to the mic, go back to the mic.
Sorry. I'm in conflict on the storage one because I have some storage.
Thank you. Process, gotta love it. Okay.
Okay, this is proposed bylaw number 2511, 2016 for mini storage and drive-throughs. So we'll start with mini storage, and by mini storage, I mean storage facilities for personal goods. Mini storage currently falls under the definition of warehouse in the zoning bylaw, which is included in the definition of light industrial. This makes mini storage currently a permitted use throughout the I1, I8, and I9 zones. This proposed amendment would add a definition for storage facility and amend the current definition for warehouse to explicitly exclude storage facility. There are currently 5 storage facilities located in Squamish in the I1 zone, and this amendment proposes that storage facility continue to be a permitted use on these 5 properties. Mini storage is an important land use in Squamish, especially as we see a trend toward more multi-unit housing, but mini storage is a land use that typically generates a low number of jobs considering the space that it takes. So the intention of the amendments proposed is to limit mini storage to locations where these facilities currently exist, and this would give the district the ability to consider applications for new mini storage facilities on a case-by-case basis. So these are the 5 properties on which storage facility is proposed to continue to be a permitted use. There's 2 on Queensway, 1 on Enterprise Way, 1 on Production Way, and 1 on 3rd Avenue downtown. Next up, proposed changes to 2 types of drive-throughs, drive-through restaurants and then drive-through facilities. I'll start with drive-through restaurants. Drive-through restaurant is currently a permitted use throughout the tourist commercial, the C3 zone, and a number of other locations that are specific to certain properties and zones. There are currently 6 drive-through restaurants in Squamish, and 2 new ones are proposed, for which a development permit was authorized last summer. This amendment proposes removing drive-through restaurant as a permitted use in the C3 zone, with the exception of 3 C3 zone properties on which a drive-through is currently located. In the C4 zone, only 2 properties are currently permitted to have a drive-through restaurant, and 1 of these has a drive-through, so no change to this property is proposed. But the second, which is located at 38167 Cleveland, no longer has a drive-through, and this amendment proposes removing drive-through as a permitted use for this property. I believe that was the Dairy Queen on Cleveland. In the C9 zone, there are no current drive-throughs or proposals for new drive-throughs, so this amendment proposes removing drive-through as a permitted use in the C9 zone. And finally, drive-through restaurant is a permitted use on 1 I1 zone property. That's the Wendy's and Tim Hortons. And there's a drive-through there, and it's proposed to continue to be a permitted use, but the legal description is proposed to be updated to reflect a lot consolidation that happened prior to development of the site. Moving on to drive-through facilities. So the zoning bylaw doesn't currently define non-restaurant drive-throughs. So by default, it's a permitted use throughout Squamish as long as the use is otherwise permitted in the zone. So this amendment proposes adding a definition for drive-through facility and permitting this use only in the 2 locations where a drive-through facility is currently located. Both of these existing drive-through facilities happen to be banks. We've received 1 comment, and that was in support of more storage facilities as a reflection of their increasing population and the smaller unit sizes that we're seeing.
Can I get some clarification on, I know when this issue has come up before, speaking to a drive-through, like a drive-through automotive lube shop. Is that covered under this?
So the definition for drive-through facility It would exclude a drive-through restaurant because we have a separate definition for that. Gas service stations, charging stations, and automobile-oriented commercial, which is another defined term that includes a number of uses.
So
what
car
we've-
wash or lube shop or
this
in that.
definition has been designed to exclude all of those so they continue to be permitted uses where they are.
Where they're permitted. Okay. Just want to clarify. Councillor, are there any other questions for clarification groups? Councillor Blackenwolf.
Automobile-oriented commercial. I'm wondering, that could be interpreted several different ways. I'm just wondering how we would explain that if an applicant came in.
We do have a definition for that one.
Shall I read it?
Yes.
Means a use providing for the retail sale of automobiles, trucks, recreational vehicles, and related parts and accessories, and includes facilities to service, wash, or repair, excludes vehicle fueling stations.
Any other questions from council for clarification? Seeing none, John Wiles is the only person on my list. If you do want to speak to this bylaw, please put your hand up. And once we've allowed anyone who wants to speak to this aspect of the bylaw and someone wants to speak to any of the 4 other bylaws, please let me know. Depending on the bylaw, Councillor Pryor may come back into the room. So just, it's a bit of a shuffle, but welcome.
Thank you. My name's John Wiles. I'm a resident of Squamish. I live in the downtown area. And also I'm representing Industrial Park and Storage in Squamish. Yeah, in terms of this bylaw, we are against it for a number of reasons. I don't think really that it's really addressed what self-storage is. The actual definition actually relates to personal storage. I've been running self-storage facilities and managing self-storage facilities for nearly 15 years. Up to 40% of the people who actually use self-storage facilities are businesses. They're actually a flexible storage solution for their businesses, certainly start-up businesses, and businesses looking to expand or even contract. What they actually do is give small businesses the flexibility to be able to manage their businesses without having to commit to long-term leases, large properties, large deposits. I don't think the definition that has been proposed actually addresses business at all. It actually specifically says personal property. Also, I think the issue of jobs, the self-storage does create jobs, creates a number of jobs in terms of its administration, in terms of the construction of the facility. This might not all happen at the same time. It may happen in phases over a period of time, so it may be construction jobs at the beginning and then at various phases through the development of self-storage facilities. Also, in terms of its use, it's a very low traffic use, it's a low noise use and a low nuisance use. It's a very clean use as well. Also, I think particularly in Squamish, self-storage is very important, and actually I would say there is an undersupply of self-storage in this town. If you actually look at the sign behind you, it says Squamish hardwired for adventure, and a huge amount of people who live here have a huge amount of equipment to undertake many of these activities, and they need somewhere to store it. With the increasing high-density development that's happening in the town, storage is becoming a premium and is a requirement for the residents. By actually potentially restricting it through this definition and through this bylaw, what you will actually be doing is actually you're creating an undersupply in the market, and you'll be actually increasing the price for the consumers and the residents of this town. Now, when we spoke to planning about this, one of their concerns was that a number of these were containers, and they felt that although they were removable, they were considered to be permanent. Well, I can tell you after 15 years of experience, that is not the case. Generally speaking, with containerized self-storage, the reason that the containers are used is because the owner of the land is actually waiting for a higher and better use of that land to be redeveloped in the future. It's a long-term hold. So they are looking to mitigate their property costs during that period of time, but eventually these pieces of land are developed. In fact, that's how self-storage actually started back in the 60s, was to actually have a use for the land for long-term development sites. Also, I mean, I'm not a bylaw expert, but I suppose it's a question. I didn't really understand why both mini storage and drive-through restaurants are actually part of the same bylaw. You know, they're completely different uses, and they have completely different issues relating to them. That's a question that I'd like to ask.
It's a good question.
Thank you. So as with the omnibus bylaws, we take all of the changes that are being proposed and we segregate them into bylaws, and sometimes, they're completely unrelated. They just happen to be put together in the same bylaw.
I mean, I know nothing about drive-throughs, but other than using them on occasion. But I feel very, very strongly about the definition within this bylaw for self-storage. It really shows a lack of understanding of how self-storage is actually used and what the benefits actually are for any community.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Any question, Councillor Black-and-Wolf?
Yeah, for the existing sites that have self-storage, and is it correct to say that they were, on the map, they're all in the business park, is that correct?
No, there's one downtown on Third
one.
Avenue.
Right, okay. And in these areas, what type of height would be allowed in that kind of, for redevelopment or expansion on these sites?
The height is what it is in the I-1 zone, so there's no different or separate restriction.
So it's like 3 or 4 stories-ish?
It is, yeah, 10.68 meters, so 3 stories.
And I should also note that we do have one more development permit application right now, which has preceded these changes, which is also for a mini storage facility that's not identified here.
In the business park.
In the business park, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Going back out to the public, is there anyone who would like to speak to this bylaw? I don't see any hands. What I'll do is I'll open the floor up to anyone who would like to speak to any of these fabulous bylaws. Yes.
I would like to just make a clarification regarding, or confuse people a bit more, regarding the streets downtown that are being proposed to be pulled back out of the bylaw, and how does that impact the bylaw from a legal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the bylaws that are part of the public hearing are the bylaws that were advertised for, that have all the streets in them, including Victoria and Vancouver. Council, given the public feedback we've heard, as well as the results of the downtown truck route study, we will be recommending that council remove those two from the bylaw and amend the bylaw at third reading. But right now, as it is, as the bylaw is presented at public hearing, all of those streets are still in. So it will be up to council whether the council decides to amend the bylaw at third reading or not.
No, I'm not confused. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? I'm going to ask 3 times, so just to warn you, I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at these public hearings? And I'll ask for a 3rd time. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at these public hearings? There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. As with any public hearing process, council is not permitted to receive further information or hear either proponent or opponent to the application once the public hearing has been concluded. So any communication should be channeled through staff. Thank you very much. Council can, after the public hearing, consider the bylaws. And perhaps I have a few amendments I'd like to make, but perhaps I will start off, if council would like to consider the Paco Road. Yeah. So council, the Paco Road, council does not have to consider the bylaws now. If council feels that they need time to deliberate or think about it, we certainly can consider a 3rd reading at the next meeting, but council does have the prerogative to consider at tonight's meeting as well. So with regard to the Paco Road bylaw, I'm wondering if what's council's interest? Councillor Race.
Yeah, I'll move third reading.
Third reading, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Councillor Race would like to speak to this bylaw?
Sure, briefly. I think this is one that the report has probably the most consensus and legitimizes the existing uses and takes some of the uncertainty out of that area, because we had a bunch of businesses in there trying to carry on business in an area that was actually zoned for residential since 1990. Our employment land strategy that we recently completed identifies that area as being better used for commercial, light industrial, and that is the purpose of this amendment, so I'm happy to support this.
Anybody else from council want to speak to it? I certainly think this is supportable. It's something we've been, that's been outlined in the employment land strategy, and so I think this is getting us back in line with securing those employment lands into the future. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up, if council wants to consider the miscellaneous amendments bylaw. Council. Councillor Race.
I'll move third reading.
Third reading, is there a seconder? Seconder, get Councillor Pryor. Councillor Race.
Very briefly, I think these are primarily housekeeping amendments, and I don't believe there is any contention about it. I take the point about the HVAC and the noise, but I think the definition of the word solid wall, I think, would meet many of those concerns, so I'm happy to support this.
Yeah, I certainly think it's a step in the right direction. Does it go too far? Not far enough, as one of the members of the public pointed out. It may not. It may be something we have to keep an eye on and continually try to figure out how we make our neighborhoods as livable as possible with regard to noise. But it's a step in the right direction, so I'm happy to support that. And as Councillor Ray said, the rest are sort of really housekeeping and almost crossing T's and dotting I's within the bylaw. So I don't think there's anything contentious. Councillor Elliott?
I'm happy to support this one, but one of the things we did here is that we should probably refer a discussion on noise limits in our noise bylaw to a committee meeting so that it doesn't get lost in the feedback that we received.
Yeah,
I'm happy to support these amendments as proposed.
Yeah, we can schedule something. Thank you. Councillor Chappelle?
Yeah, I agree with that. The good neighbor bylaw needs to come back at some point, and that addresses all of the concerns of citizens. Look forward to that.
Yeah, the good, for the members of the public who haven't heard of the idea of this good neighbor bylaw, we have been sort of trying to deal with them in separate bylaws, sort of in a haphazard way, and I think the ultimate goal is to sort of pull all these good neighbor bylaws in together into one clean, nice document. This has some good neighbor aspects to it, but ultimately down the road, I think we'd like to consolidate into a comprehensive good neighbor bylaw, but we're starting to check off some of the things in other bylaws. So, I'll call the question. Oh, is there a question? Yes, there's a question. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next two, Councillor Pryor, you have to recuse yourself.
Oh, you didn't do that when I was out of the room?
No. Why don't we deal with the downtown commercial one, 2513. Maybe I'll preempt this a little bit. I do agree. I am very appreciative of the community coming forward and expressing their point of view. I agree. We haven't done the proper community consultation on this. I think our intentions are certainly good, and some of the unintended consequences of our ideals or goals we heard loud and clear. So I think particularly with regard to the setbacks and the office on the second floor, we need to have a more comprehensive consultation and communication with the community on those two aspects. Is it worth moving forward any part of this bylaw at this point? If we pull out the setbacks and the commercial second floor for further communication and likely sort of rescinding it back to first reading so we can do community consultation. Would you suggest the whole bylaw go back to that?
That's all that's in the bylaw.
Oh, right, that's right. There's nothing else on this one.
Yes.
Councillor Chappelle.
I really think the setbacks are different than, I mean, we've proposed a lot of different things in the last little bit on Cleveland and in the downtown. And I really consider the difference between, I mean, we've been trying to get employment space on the second floor, but it was always precipitated by the fact that we had density bonusing to offer. And if we lose the density bonusing, we have to go back with second floor office space. It can't require something that developers and banks can't pay for. So because we pulled back on the second floors, on the height, on the density, I'd still like to leave the second floor workspace in there, but I completely agree with the public that because that's been in there for a while, we've been discussing that for a long time, but the setbacks is relatively new. But I'm happy to listen to council and
I'll go to Councillor Race and Councillor Elliott in a moment. I think the challenge is separating these out into pieces. They really need to be dealt with comprehensively so we understand the cumulative impact of all of these pieces on properties. So that's why I'll suggest that we rescind second reading and go out to further public engagement to make sure everyone understands what's happening and make sure we are actually achieving the intention that we're trying to achieve.
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead, and I've got Councillor.
Yeah, can we make sure that that is, we've gone to first reading on the density, and can we make sure that all the downtown changes go through the same level of public consultation together? Because they all affect each other, and we can't separate out this bylaw from the density bylaw. So I think that if we all have a clearer understanding on how those pieces fit together, including parking and including like how we can actually build the downtown in a comprehensive way, that would be very helpful.
Councillor Race, then Councillor Elliott.
So with that in mind, I was going to move that we rescind second reading.
Oh, I already did. I was looking for a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Race. You want to speak to that, Councillor Race?
Well, just briefly, and just for the reasons outlined by Councillor Chappelle, I think this all affects more or less the same area in different ways. And so if we are going back to the public on the height issue, it makes sense at the same time to go back with these other potential changes. So it's kind of one package, one consultation, and hopefully one vision coming out of it for the downtown area. So I think it makes sense to have these two go through together.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
I agree with my colleagues. The other thing that I heard tonight that concerns me a little bit is that either we don't have current addresses for all the landholders that are affected, or there's something wrong with our noticing system. Because I don't think it's right that we heard from several speakers that they didn't receive notices in time or with the information. And so I think it deserves a look at some point to figure that out. I mean, there's responsibility on both sides here, but if we're hearing from the public that they're not receiving notices, then we do need to look at that, because our public process is dependent on that system working well.
Thank you. Councillor Blackman-Mills, did you have your hand? I saw something. Oh, Councillor Kent had.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues here as well. The original intent of this wasn't to stifle development or to be punitive towards any of the landholders or stakeholders in town. I want to see it go back as well. There's a lot of confusion around the lane setbacks, the parking, loss of floor space, and correct me if I'm wrong through the chair, but to Mr. Vilaniskis, the second floor office space wasn't exactly mandated. You said it could be on any of the additional upper floors as well?
Yes, the bylaw
It wasn't just
requires
confined
one
to the second.
other floor to have frontage, commercial or office space.
But I do agree, I don't think that the public...
Like a rooftop restaurant.
There you go. I don't think that the public got the sufficient communication that was required on this either.
No, I think we heard that loud and clear that, and I think it's a very confusing bylaw because there's so many different zones, there's so many different things that are in there now, and just make sure we want to be really clear with the intention and get the feedback from the community. I'll suggest we all vote to rescind second reading and bring this forward to public consultation. And just so people understand, first reading is really the presentation of a bylaw. The absolute intent is to get the feedback I expect modifications, amendments, and perhaps even a complete rewrite of these, depending on the feedback that comes back. So please understand that this is really opening up the conversation to make sure we're doing it right. And I will apologize. I think, it's really evident that we did not communicate this very well. Certainly not the intention, and it got very confusing because there's so many moving parts. And I will certainly wear that and appreciate the public coming forward. I'm going to call the question, if that's okay with council. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And finally, we have mini storage and drive-through restaurants. Council, is there any inclination? Councillor Black and Wolf?
Yeah, I'll move that.
It's been moved by Councillor Black and Wolf. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kent. Councillor Black and Wolf, would you like to speak to it?
Sure, yeah, I'll just speak to it briefly. I think that this is a good compromise in terms of specifically on the drive-through measure. We know that drive-throughs have significant externalities in the areas in which they are situated, and so our current drive-throughs are, for the most part, on the highway, so the externalities are a little bit dispersed, and that's good. So, but I think we should be looking to have a infrastructure in our community where pedestrian and active transportation is prioritized, and putting the lid on drive-throughs helps us to reorient it that way. And in terms of the storage, I'm supporting this because I think that it is important that we make sure that there is land available for other uses, and recognizing, of course, that self-storage can take many forms, and in other areas, other cities, multi-story self-storage happens. So I think there is still some capacity in town for the storage needs, but if there isn't, and we're hearing from the public that we are undersupplied, then any applicant can come to council at any time, and we do have the discretion to add more storage. So that's why I'm supporting this bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Thank you. Speaking about the drive-throughs, firstly, this is not to be considered a ban on drive-throughs. This gives council, in my mind, discretion to decide on a site-by-site basis where it might be appropriate to have drive-throughs. And like the next part of this, the difficulty was many of the existing zonings in our community had an automatic right to a drive-through, and it didn't give us really any control. And we found that out, at least I found that out, when we had the discussion last term about the CIVC. If we wanted a financial institution there, then we had no right to say whether or not a drive-through would go with it. Not that we would have changed our decision in any way, but we didn't have the discretion. In some places it's appropriate to have them, in other places it might not, and this gives council the ability on a site-by-site basis to make that decision. And I look at the mini storage the same way, because as staff said, it really, right now in the I-1 zone, any warehouse area could end up as a mini storage. And I don't think that really gives us enough control over these employment lands that are very vital to the health of our community. So once again, as Councillor Blackman Wolf said, on a site-by-site basis, we can consider storage if it's needed and if it's appropriate for that site. And it may be appropriate for that site on an upper floor as opposed to a ground floor, which might be better used for something else. So again, we're not stopping mini storage. We are just taking more control over exactly where it might happen in our community. And we will, as any council, would have to respond to the needs of the community. And if there is a need, then I'm sure applications will come forward. But we will have the ability then to decide where.
Councillor Chabot.
I no longer need to speak, but I can speak to the ban versus the rezoning, and Councillor Rice did it quite well, so I'm going to get it back.
Anyone else would like to speak to this bylaw? If there are no other hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Can we get Councillor Pryor, please? Council has two other items on the agenda. There is consideration of adoption of a zoning bylaw 2200-2011, amendment bylaw 1861 Mampine Road 2509. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And there were three resolutions put forward this afternoon in committee. If I could just ask people to be quiet until they get outside, we're almost done. Very exciting. There's three LMLGA proposed motions. Did council get all the updated? Okay. Someone want to move those from, that we forward these on to LMLGA? Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Oh, would you like to speak to it? Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, can we just get the SANE spelled out, those first words, Councillor Chappelle?
Yeah.
So that people know what it stands for?
We'll
Just as a technicality.
we'll add it to the first whereas, so,
Yeah.
and then put it in brackets so it's evident throughout. And just, if I may, for council's information, there's a process whereby municipalities can go through to help influence either policy change or regulation or legislative change at the federal and provincial levels. And the first step in sort of getting these issues into a debate format is through an organization called the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, which is one of the 5 area associations of UBCM. And so these will go on to LMLGA. They'll be debated there and discussed there and voted on there. And then should they succeed in going through LMLGA, they will then go on to UBCM for consideration by the membership throughout BC. So that's just a little background on that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.